Hi, Don. Thanks for joining us on GTM Expertise. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, Ben. Pleasure to be here.
No worries at all. That's great. So today, one of the things we really wanted to dig into is something you wrote very gracefully in your book around the sales process and a specific part of the journey in a company when the sales process needs to be implemented when it's time to scale. And so that's kind of what we're going to get into. But I would really love to hear more about your career to date, your journey, and how you ended up doing what you do today.
Sure. Well, I started in sales in the late 80s selling what at the time was emerging technology, which was barcode printer applicators back when we weren't scanning things regularly like we are
Mm,
now.
mm.
And then that led to a 25-year sales career of selling basically emerging technologies into a number of different markets. So in 2010, I started my consulting company, Delivering Value. We focus on sales performance. So we're not a sales process company as much as we are how to get the most out of a sales team or how to build a sales team that you can get to perform repeatedly. And for the past 15 years, we've worked with what I'd refer to as emerging companies. You know, they're out of the startup phase and that they have some customers and they're beginning to get an organization around them. And we work with those companies to help them build a sales function that can fuel their growth. And about a year ago, I wrote a book that you referred to called Entrepreneur Sales Secrets Revealed. You can find it on my website, deliveringvalue.com, or of course the ubiquitous Amazon.
Sure.
That's pretty much what's brought us here today. I've spent the last 15 years, I've probably worked with more than 50 companies and helping them put together not only the talent that they need, but also the post-hire processes and whatnot that they need, not from a sales process standpoint, but more from a sales performance management standpoint.
That's brilliant, Don. Thanks for the intro. That's super. I think we're going to learn quite a bit today. So for our kind of audience, a lot of the inflection point, if you like, to building a team comes when the founder-led sales has kind of got the company off the ground. Often there are early adopters in the market who are willing to take a punt with the founder and kind of they like that interaction, getting these emerging technologies in their hands. But then there's a kind of transition point then when that founder-led sales either dries up or just starts to become a bit difficult. But what are the signs that you see in companies when they get to that point that suggest that they need to change and shift gears and scale that process?
Yeah. Well, if you're a solopreneur and you are spending more time on sales than you are on scaling the company and improving your product and doing all the other things that a company leader has to do, which is a myriad of things. And you realize that I can't pay attention to strategy. I can't pay attention to product development. I can't pay attention to the other things that are going to help my company because I'm spending way too much time trying to drive revenue. That's normally the tipping point where it's, I talk to clients who are just like, I got to get out of the sales business. Or they've hired one salesperson and they're frustrated because they seem like why am I paying this person? Because I keep getting pulled back into sales. That's the tipping point typically that I see.
That's very familiar to me too. I think that concept that you're spending time and they're going to spend more time on sales because it's not their natural, potentially not their natural. There are commercial founders. Typically, what we work with a lot of technical founders who are probably not so intuitive about what's the next step. They're doing a lot of research ahead of time. They're spending a lot more time, not necessarily efficiently. And then the second piece, when they've hired their offload ability that doesn't really seem to offload because it keeps coming back to them. I think
Right.
I can relate to that. Yeah, for sure. So like, let's picture that technical founder who's made that decision and finally come to that kind of assumption that they need to change things up, and they're starting this sales process from scratch. Let's say they might even be managing it in an Excel spreadsheet or kind of on the back of a napkin. Who knows? But what are the things that they should do to lay that like groundwork or foundation to a real sales process?
Well, first of all, you got to acknowledge the fact that sales is not a commodity. Sales talent is not a commodity. salespeople are a dime a dozen. But finding the folks that will really get out there and get after it is a challenge. And so my first word of advice is you've got to recognize that fact. You can't just get someone with charm and hand them a phone and a list of prospects and tell them to go forth and prosper. You've got to look for certain things. So you've got to be very particular about this hire. If I'm talking to the CEO of a tech company or the founder of a tech company, I'll use the analogy of, listen, you lose sleep over hiring top shelf development talent. You should feel the same way about sales.
Mm-hmm.
Because good salespeople will drive your growth. There's no question about it. And secondly, when you're interviewing, it's very easy to get charmed and to be, I don't want to say misled, that's a strong word, but to maybe be spun in a direction that maybe doesn't reflect the real world. And so therefore, you've got to have a good vetting process. And step number one is you've got to talk to people about whether or not they have drive. And you don't ask them, so Ben, do you have drive, right? But you ask them things like, tell me about the time when you went the extra mile, or tell me about the achievement that you have that you're most proud of. And people with drive will always point to things where they have gone that extra mile. Well, while I was in my late 30s, I went back to school for 3 years and got my MBA. Well, if a person's doing that working full time, they've got a fair amount of drive. Or if they're doing things over and above in their day to day, they're driven to succeed. So you've got to have that, because you can train a lot of stuff, but you cannot train drive, period. And there are ways to look at that and to determine that. But part of the interview process has to be, does this person have drive?
Yeah, and that kind of drive comes to their ambition too, right? Like it can be quite tempting, I suppose, to try and bring someone in who's done it all, seems ready to go, and like it'll just be like just plug them in and off they'll go, versus like what we tend to advise on as well, which is someone who might be at that point in a year and a half, but like they're coming in and you give them some of the tools, but a lot of it's got to be initiative. This isn't a gig where you kind of just get given a handbook and you get trained and then off you go, right? Like there's a lot of scrappiness and a lot of behaving like a sponge and the like. So I can definitely see that.
Yeah, I mean, you can find the people out there, but don't fall into the trap of just because they have some industry or some subject matter expertise that's going to translate into sales, because it won't. It's an entirely different game. And many companies that I've gotten involved with, they'll hire folks with subject matter expertise and then wonder why they're not selling anything. And the main reason is it's two entirely different skill sets. If you can find it where they have both, which is a rare animal, then you've got to pay a premium for them, and you shouldn't even blink at doing that.
Right.
But generally, salespeople are good at persuading people to give them money at the end of the day. And that's the goal. You can train subject matter expertise. Matter of fact, if you're scaling, one thing to think about is you don't always want to hire more reps. Sometimes you might want to hire a subject matter expert that you pair or you make available to the sales team. And I can give you a specific example from my past where we were, and this is my last full-time role, where we were selling into senior care in the nursing home specifically. And that was a very complex sale. We were selling a very complex technology, use speech recognition to do documentation, etc. That industry is rather interesting because you have owners that run these places and literally own them. Then you have a management layer, and then you have a clinical layer. And in order to get a deal, you've got to successfully persuade all three. And it's very difficult as a salesperson, unless you've been a clinician, to sell them on the clinical part. So I only had 2 salespeople. We added a clinical person to the team that had that juice, that would go out and ride shotgun on sales calls and on different sorts of follow-ups and whatnot. And that proved to be fabulously successful. So when you're scaling, sometimes it's a good idea to think outside the box. Immediately people think, well, I just need to hire more salespeople. If you've got 1 or 2 on the team already, I would really consider looking at supporting cast before you add the third. Push their pipelines to the point where they're basically just like, look, I can't chase any more deals. And it's rare that you're going to hear that from a salesperson, but it can get to that point, right?
It can.
And that's what should force the hire of the rest of the folks on your team. You know what? Coming back to something that we were talking about before, the most difficult part for an entrepreneur, in my opinion, is the vetting process of figuring out whether or not someone's worth hiring when it comes to sales. Because if they're not charming, you shouldn't hire them in the first place. But you have to put the charm aside. You should be like, okay, so that everyone's going to have that. Let's really look at the fundamentals. And so the vetting process has to be very thorough. It can't just be, 30 minutes. Oh, I like this person. Let's let him talk to a couple other people. What do you think? Oh, yeah, we like Don. We should hire him. No, you really need to open them up, so to speak. Have them tell you about their wins. Have them tell you about their losses. Have them tell you the reasons why. The good folks that are out there, anytime they've lost a deal, they'll tell you it was their fault, that they missed something or they didn't have a connection. The ones who aren't will tell you it was something else. Oh, we lost on price, or we didn't have a feature, or whatever. That's one thing to look for. But secondarily, and something that I instituted a long time ago, even before starting my consulting practice, in which I recommend to my clients, is if you've got a winner, then bring them in and put them through their paces. And you can do this remotely. They don't have to come into the office. But I refer to this as a hot seat interview. So what you're going to do is you're going to have this person and tell them, you're going to interview in front of a panel. There's going to be more than one of us. And the first 15 minutes, you're to present to us your background and why it makes you a good fit for this position. You only get 15 minutes. You have a hard stop at 15 minutes. No violation whatsoever. 15:01, you're done. And then the second part is you get to do an overview presentation on the company, and just based on stuff that you can find on the internet, so that you can see if these folks have enough talent to put together a pitch. And I've used this for many, many years. Just currently used it with a new client that I have in Houston. At first, the CEO was resistant. He said, I don't know. And I said, come on, trust me on this. It works. And so I did persuade him. And then afterwards, he was just like, okay, I get it. Because we had one candidate that came in that had interviewed brilliantly, but she crashed and burned during the presentation part. And so it's real easy to talk about what you can do. It's almost like if you're a golfer, it's real easy to talk about golf. But all right, if I'm going to hire you, you're going to have to come in and hit some balls for me. And I'm going to need to see if you can really deliver on what you do. And the person that we hired did come in and deliver. And I would recommend that to anyone who's out there. Put them through their paces. It's one of the few ways of vetting salespeople or vetting any candidate that you really get that chance to basically take them for a test drive. Right? Totally. What are you going to do if you're hiring an accountant? Give them an audit and tell them to do it? I mean, you can't do that, right? But a salesperson, here, do a presentation for us. Let's see how you did it. Very, very valuable.
The kind of also the adjacent part to that is so that's to plan for success. The other part of it is the other way around, to say, like, it's monumentally a bigger impact if you make a mistake on this hire in a startup where you've only got 5, 6, 10 people than like an enterprise sales team of 1,000 where, all right, you plug them in, but if they didn't work, you cycle them out. But like that onboarding process, that whole energy, the disruption to everyone's days, getting them in, bringing them on board, taking the gamble and a punt on them, and then to find out 6 months or even less down the road it's just not working out and you have to reboot that entire cycle. Like that's a big lift, right?
It's a very big lift, no question. It's probably one of the most pivotal hires they make. Because making one that's not good can stunt your growth. Because one thing that I've learned doing what I've done for so long is there are windows in markets, and you want to be able to capitalize as much on that window of opportunity as you can, because it's not going to be there forever. I don't have stats to back this up, but let's just say it might be 3 to 5 years that this is really going to be a moneymaker for you. And then after that, you're going to go to Jeffrey Moore's Main Street and just try to maintain your customers, right? So consequently, it's probably one of the most important hires that you're going to make. And one thing that I see, a behavior that I see repeatedly is, what am I getting for my money? And which is fair all day long. But one thing that CEOs don't necessarily understand fully, or they can accept it, but I don't think they understand it viscerally, that building a pipeline takes time.
Mm.
And you can't bring a salesperson in and expect them to sell something in the first month or two. They've got to establish relationships. They have to establish rapport. They have to find the buying cycles. That takes time. And I'm going to plug a third section of my book, which talks about sales performance management and sales vital signs. So anytime I talk to a CEO, they go, okay, but fair enough, but I can't wait 7 months and then have them fail. And so what you've got to do is you've got to have things that you put into place to look at their performance before you actually get to that point. Because a new hire should at least be adding opportunities to the pipeline. They're not going to be closing, but they should be adding opportunities. So are they generating interest at the top end? Are they converting that interest to action? Are they moving things through the pipeline? And then ultimately, if they are, things are going to come out the other end.
Yep.
So in those first 6 months, you should be more focused on pipeline pressure and how big that pipe's getting than the fact that they're closing things.
Right.
Now, that being said, never take the pipeline at face value. Very big proponent of, you have to do a weekly one-on-one with each member of your sales team and go through the deals that they have in their pipeline and then their forecast. Where are we on this? What's the status? What's the immediate next step? Who are you talking to? What's driving the need? And have those conversations every week, because these deals are dynamic. And that's another misconception I see, where it's almost just like, all right, so the deal's on the conveyor belt and it just goes through this process where eventually it becomes money. That's not the way it goes.
No.
That deal meanders and morphs and, speeds up and slows down and does all sorts of other things along the way. So you've got to have a skeptic that's basically auditing that pipeline each week. But by doing that, you're de-risking your hire. Because if you've got someone that's come in the first 90 days, they've found you nothing, you've got a problem.
Yeah.
And it's time to have a conversation sooner rather than later. Instead of 6 months going, you haven't sold anything in 6 months.
Yes.
Right? And sometimes they get impatient and get rid of that person before their pipeline can actually deliver.
Right.
Which doesn't help the company.
Right. I mean, the enterprise sales cycles these days can stretch, 3/4 of a year to 18 months in some cases, right? And beyond. And if you're hunting large, complex enterprise deals, you do have to be patient and wait. And that conveyor belt, as you described, definitely doesn't exist. It's a slalom, ski slalom, plus all sorts of other hurdles along the way and down. And it's
basically
real
like
journey.
Frogger.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that, like this, we talked about founder-led sales and we talked about having that subject matter expert, but like just touching on that, how does the founder, let's paint them as a technical founder, so they're not necessarily commercially savvy, but they have done some of that sales and they have gone through a bit of that kind of process. How does that knowledge transfer best happen for that new salesperson coming in, or the first or second salesperson coming in?
Well, that's a challenge across the organization, right? You get to a point where you need to institutionalize tribal knowledge, and that's not just in sales. But at a minimum, you've got a pitch deck that you're using, or at least some sort of an outline or a flow. So to me that's the first place to start. Here's our story. Also, I think one of the most critical things that smaller companies can do is they need reference accounts.
Right.
And when you bring in a salesperson, they need to understand your go-to clients. I actually refer to those types of references as lighthouse accounts. They basically shine a light to show others your value, right? They're worth their weight in gold. And you want your sales team, and even you, if you're still a solopreneur, when you're in front of a client, you want to spend more time talking about successful clients than talking about your product. Because your product is not the star of the show. The The value that you deliver is the star of the show. And that's what you want to focus on. There's a great book that I read back in the early 2000s by a guy by the name of Paul Weifels, and it's called The Crossing Companion.
Mm-hmm.
And he worked with Jeffrey Moore, who anyone in tech pretty much knows anymore. And he goes into the different things that they saw with tech leaders and whatnot. And one of his great quotes is, "Do not confuse your compelling reason to sell with the client's compelling reason to buy." And the compelling reason for people to buy is to solve a business problem.
Yep.
They're not sitting at their desk going, "Boy, I really wish I could find a cloud-based AI-driven platform that's written in open source that has 17 different features." No, they're sitting there going, "I've got issues in customer service and I need to get another 5% out of customer sat." So when you bring a new salesperson in, you've got to teach them that stuff. Another book that I read a while ago, Heavy Hitter Selling, the gent that wrote that said that the people that make heavy hitters, they sell by telling vignettes. They tell stories that elucidates what they've done for other clients. So it's part of that onboarding. Spend as much time with that. And if you can broker conversations between your salesperson and that client, even better. And to me, the last thing you do, obviously, you've got to teach them something about the product, but you don't need to make your salespeople product experts. Matter of fact, you're better off allowing someone else to serve that role, even if it's you as the solopreneur, to support your sales team. That adds more credibility. It adds a lot more credibility.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that play, because whilst it might feel sort of efficient, or especially when you're dealing with time zones, you might have your HQ in another country, and it's like, I'm gonna get that guy on a call again. But like the concept that you deliver everything as a salesperson probably doesn't drive a lot of sort of confidence in your buyer, really, because your buyer's like, surely there's someone more to this business than this person who keeps turning up, and one day it's the salesperson, next person is the demo person, next person they're taking support calls, And I think that kind of orchestration of the talent internally in the company and wheeling the right people in allows you to drive a deal rather than kind of just be all in the middle of it, right?
Positively. And you got to remember that when a salesperson enters the room, they're at a disadvantage from the get-go, because right. You've got sales professionals, and then you've got so-called salespeople, and it's right. The so-called salespeople that give sales professionals a bad name. But unfortunately, the so-called salespeople outnumber the sales professionals.
Yeah.
So you're starting from a position of weakness coming through the door, and so and when you start to go down into the subject matter stuff or the tech stuff or whatnot, you should tag someone else in to do that, because that person's going to be more believable. And the client, even if you're going to relay exactly the same information, the prospect is going to listen to that tech person more than they're going to listen to the salesperson. And smart sales teams know how to marshal their internal resources to put the right people in front of the right people on the other side in order to move the deal forward. And that's really what you want to look for. You want to look for an orchestrator, and you want to teach them how to orchestrate and who their go-to people are.
Awesome. The kind of last bit I wanted to touch on was as a founder, you mentioned at the top of the call, like they got a lot to do with making a product better. They're keeping investors happy. They're going to look at the longer term growth. They're dealing with HR usually as well, right? Because they've got a small team, so they're de facto. What are the common mistakes you see they make, though, in terms of sales kind of process mistakes or sales red flags that you've seen over the years when you see founders in that position, that inflection point position where you've come in potentially to help them? What are they making? Because what we're trying to do here is give people a sense of what they're making. It's okay to make mistakes, of course, but it kind of sure. Something to rely on for that would be great.
Well, several things along those lines. One is you can't underestimate how risky you are when you're new, right? I love to collect quotes, and I have one from Jeff Bezos, who basically says, "We are pioneers, and the history of pioneers is not that good." And there's a lot of truth to that,
Yeah.
right? So you can't go in there thinking that I've got the best thing since sliced bread and all I have to do is demo it and sell it and then it's going to sell itself. No, no. You've got to ameliorate that risk, definitely. And the way to do that is you talk about other successful customers. So one mistake I see is, underestimating the risk and then thinking that the whiz bang of your product that you're so proud of is the key to selling it. And it's not. It's not. One other thing, and I've had this conversation a number of times over the last 15 years, you cannot compress the client's buying and evaluation cycle.
Yeah.
I've had CEOs going, this is easy. We can close more deals because we need a decision in 30 days. Well, guess what? You don't dance. You don't get to pick the music that you dance to. The client does. And there's no way to compress that. The only way that you make it any faster is that you're very responsive and you're very thoughtful and compelling in how you present things when they ask questions to keep pushing them towards being comfortable that your solution is really going to answer what they want. I see those mistakes
Totally.
all the time.
Totally. I
right?
like that one
Can't
on the responsiveness too. The responsiveness, I've seen that myself when I was out in APAC. You might have 2 or 3 competitors or companies that that are going to be in that buying cycle with because you're dealing with a fairly blue chip company that you're selling to. You've got a platform which everyone needs, and really just being the most responsive and complete and to that kind of the questions and the evaluation goes a long way, right? Like to kind of leave it till tomorrow is too late, in my opinion. That kind of attention span drops, and sure enough, their evaluation and ears look elsewhere, especially today with the pace of innovation and the choice that the buyers have, and frankly, the information at their hand. They have 95% of the information already available before you get on the call. They've got all of that, so you got to go above and beyond, and that's one of the ways to do it.
Yeah, no question. No question. Sales has changed a lot since I started. Yeah. That was quite some time ago. I mean, it used to be the only way that you sold something to someone was to go see them.
Right.
And now it's, that we can't get everyone in the same room because Ben's here and Don's here and Mark's here and we're dispersed across the country or dispersed across the world.
Yeah.
Therefore, everything becomes, the world of Zoom.
Yeah.
One other thing that needs to stay foremost in mind is that every deal has momentum and you want to do things to keep the momentum going forward. And even if someone goes dark on you, which sometimes happens, because believe it or not, people aren't just sitting around obsessed with buying your stuff, right? They've got other jobs. Your stuff is just a piece of that. And sometimes they are just going to be non-responsive. And during that time, you still want to keep the dialogue going. And the wrong way to do it is, hey, Ben, I haven't heard from you in a couple of weeks. I'm just reaching out for a status. Do that when someone's busy and eventually they're going to be annoyed. So what you got to do is just float them little things. Hey, thought you might be interested in this article that talks about the impact of our technology on whatever. Or, we just closed a new client. Here's what they're doing. And even if it's a one-way conversation, you have to do that to keep the momentum going.
Yep.
Because once the wind comes out of the sails, it's exceptionally difficult to put it back.
Don, that's great. That's a great place to finish. Really appreciate all your advice there, and I'm sure there's lots of people out there who will value that greatly. Great to hear your story, and all the best with the book. And very pleased to have this opportunity to chat to you. Thanks for taking the time with DTM Expertise. Appreciate it.
Sure. I've enjoyed it, Ben.
Thanks, Don.